Today we're going to discuss, as Emery mentioned, the Lehigh Valley and how we're working to adapt to change here. The Lehigh Valley is currently experiencing phenomenal growth with an explosion in warehousing and manufacturing jobs, healthcare expansions, and residential growth supported by these new local jobs, as well as proximity to Philadelphia and the New York regions. In the next 15 years, we're anticipating a 25% increase in local population, moving us into a set of peer regions similar in size to the cities like Tucson, Arizona, or Honolulu, Hawaii. The Valley has an exciting future ahead, and we're blessed to live in such a thriving region. This growth does bring with it some challenges, though. New roadway construction is constant across the region. New areas of growth outside of our three core cities have blurred any lines, created a more closely connected region than ever. And new job types are requiring different land uses than the region was historically built to accommodate. On the development map shown here, which was created by the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission, you can see current areas of development in gray. And the cities of Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton are well connected. They're surrounded by boroughs and townships that have grown their own centers of commerce and businesses, all drawing their own unique commuting needs. So all of the dots you see on this map are centers of commerce that have grown across the region, connecting it well. LANTA is tasked with providing access to the entire region for all of our car-free and car-light residents, and our legacy system has to adapt with the changes across the valley. So today, Molly and I are going to discuss three ways in which LANTA is working to tackle these challenges, working backward from the long-term land use initiatives to make sure the future built environment is suitable for all modes. Then we'll talk about enhanced bus service, a project we're hoping to build in the next few years. And we'll end with our near-term service adjustments born out of a comprehensive operational analysis completed over the last year. In the interest of time, as Anne-Marie mentioned, we'll be presenting all three topics and then answer any questions at the end. So please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation in the chat box at any time. We'll collect those questions and answer them at the appropriate time at the end. So with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Molly Wood, LANTA's land use specialist and planner, to dive into our strategies in land use policy and planning. Molly.
Thank you, AJ, and thank you, WTS, for having us. Lehigh Valley is pretty unique since there are the three traditional urban cores, each with its own transit center, along with a suburban rural periphery. Our Atlanta service area is 30 routes with only 84 buses, 17,000 daily trips, and only 3 times a year where we can change our routing and schedules. And that would be in January, June, and September. And sometimes that's not fast enough for the growth that is occurring. Our routes are changing and adapting to the growth. And how we operate our service area will have a direct impact on our existing and future bus stops. We're trying to connect the dots of current and future development projects and the growth trends occurring in an area where we don't serve. If you see this top right map here, it is our little snippet of our service area, and all those little red circles are the areas where we're receiving demand and requests to serve, and it's just not feasible for an appropriate running time for a bus, and it's really stretching our service thin. But following growth will provide opportunities to reevaluate service, make routing more efficient, and enhance future bus stops. Next slide. I want to show a visual of what the Lehigh Valley is dealing with in terms of employment growth and the lack of the connectivity. It makes it extremely hard to incorporate safe bus stops if the sidewalk connectivity is not there. The aerial view on the right is actually the Walk LV tool from the Lehigh Valley Planning Commission. It shows the overview of where walkability is continuous, scarce, or non-existent. You can see the Allentown urban core more to the east, and you can see these little yellow and red dots more speckling out towards the west, and those are our bus stops. And the red arrow is pointing to all the industrial development, for instance, occurring more in Fogelsville and Upper Macungie. And just south of that, you see the sidewalk connectivity, but it's really only incorporating where the residential is. So it's a strong visual of the sidewalk dichotomy and residential employment land uses, where the sidewalks are incorporated with residential, and the bus stops are incorporated with employment. Employment centers and transportation do go hand in hand, but this land use disconnect between the two are more with more employment centers being built out in the rural periphery versus our traditional urban core transit routes and the walkability. And it really shows the history of the urban core, and with the older industrial building stock in the urban core, just can't accommodate the newer standards of spec and flex spaces and the desired ceiling heights of the warehouses today that are being built more in the green fields. We can't control the growth, but we are trying to adapt. And at the end of the day, we want people to get to their jobs, and we're trying to undo this disconnect. Next slide. So my role here at LANTA is to establish relationships with a number of the municipalities, developers, and engineers in Lehigh Valley to introduce our transit supportive land use agenda. Starting with the municipalities, we really need to get on the initial checklist when a land development plan is submitted to that municipality, because then we can provide comment. And the stronger relationship with that municipality, the more they back us up in the approvals in the planning commission process. And that involves just how we evaluate the existing routing, but also the future routing. If this project that is being submitted is in an area where we know growth is happening, we can put in our comments and our recommendations based on that future outlook. With that said, the several municipalities have required this early engagement with us in that process, and it's become a well-oiled machine in that we receive land development plans without asking for them. Sometimes they don't even relate to our service area, but allows us to keep track of what's happening. It makes us reevaluate where the growth is realistically occurring. It allows us to keep the employment centers, medical, and mixed-use commercial growth on our radar. We also know the municipality's vision for the area and having their full support. It gives more opportunity for safer bus stop options if we know the municipality plans are even calling in previously deferred sidewalks, which has helped us tremendously on some existing bus stops that are just so grandfathered in on the side of the road. Trust me, this is like my #1 goal, is to change all of those. For engineers and developers, they've come to know what we expect. If it's an engineer that we've dealt with a lot with many projects, sometimes we're receiving plans. It's an easy call for that to that engineer. They know what we want, and they're telling their client that as well. But a lot of it is just more the realistic approach, and that relationship with the engineers helps us understand there's certain things that we may not be able to control. Is it the existing or proposed topography, slope, stormwater, right-of-way issues, weight restricted bridges? Allowing that conversation to happen allows us their perspective as well. But in terms of what's realistic, can we even serve on the corridor? That's our main goal. We don't want to deviate. Everyone wants to be the exception, and there are certain cases where we need to, but otherwise, can we serve? Or if we have to serve on the property, can we circulate as close to the corridor as possible? We prefer the shallow setback of buildings. And where the existing bus stop is, where is the proposed front entrance? We get so many calls, especially in the warehouse construction, where the employee entrance is a mile away on the opposite side of the building where our bus stop is. And we hear that from the employees, that we're too far from the front entrance and they're already late. Meanwhile, we thought we did our job and we dropped them off at work. So there's so many questions that come in this process, and the more we know, the more we can help. And really it comes down to who is the end user and how are they going to get there. We encourage site selection by existing routing all the time, and at the end of the day, the transit rider is the pedestrian. Our main goal is to make sure that transit rider can get from the bus stop to the main entrance of their destination. Next slide. There's 2 main land uses that I can dive more into with additional questions to consider. Like I said, warehousing industrial is in an isolated employment center that's 5 miles from our closest route, or is there a growth trend happening in that area for us to consider? And that AJ, can touch on that in a little bit. Is the site conducive to transit? Is there a gate at the entrance? Again, there's so many scenarios where we've tried to serve some of these warehouses, and there's no way for a bus to even turn around. And also, when we see a project come in, what's the size of the facility? Is it a 1 million square foot warehouse? We know there's going to be jobs that are generated. If it's a smaller one, we may not get a lot of jobs coming in. And that's, again, we need to justify the ridership in order to make any of these deviations happen. And another big one is medical. It's not just the standalone one hospital. It's so many outpatient centers, and I think we become, in the past, an afterthought. It's more we hear from the patients who can't get there first, but we've really been working with the hospitals in our area, St. Luke's and LVHN, as developers, and they become true partners, and we're with them along the way when they do prepare plans for their next facility. Let's see it. Next slide, please. And this is another example of that sidewalk inventory I was talking about. And my apologies for the left red arrow. It should be slightly higher towards those standalone red and yellow dots. But an example of two types of industrial parks occurring. One's the older industrial park, you can see on the bottom left. Well established, it's been there for a while, but it was built in a time where there's been no sidewalks. That's a very old shelter that I'm looking at. It's probably about 30 years old. And if that shelter got knocked down tomorrow, we wouldn't be able to replace it. We need the sidewalk connectivity for ADA purposes to put in a new shelter. But if you look on the right, and the arrows pointing to the newer majestic industrial area of LVIP 7 in Bethlehem, that's private investment for the enhancement of these bus stops with the pedestrian network. And I think that's what we'll be seeing more of in the Lehigh Valley. And this is, you know, we strive to be able to serve these types of areas that would accommodate transit amenities. Next slide. This is my favorite example of an industrial development in transit success story. It's your untraditional idea of redevelopment in a well-established suburban industrial area where we are. This takes place in Upper Macungie. It's an example of an older company that closed down. This is the former Kraft plant. And we had three, the site is so massive, we had 3 bus stops in front of this facility. And there's no sidewalks on Industrial Boulevard. And then a new company, Keurig and Dr. Pepper, moved in, submitted their land development plan, and we were able to comment and recommend what we needed. We knew we can't have sidewalks on Industrial Boulevard, but the site is so big, we were able to request the internal sidewalk circulation to reach the corridor for the pedestrian connectivity. And when I say we be patient to wait for these types of properties, that's really what we had to do. There's so many sites out there that we have our eye on because we know the full potential of what they could be. And to go through that land development process again, based on our partnerships with the municipalities and developing a relationship with the developer and the contractor, we will be heard. Next slide. And this is what it looks like. The interior sidewalk was able to reach Industrial Boulevard. We're able to have a shelter put in. And this is a true redevelopment effort along our existing routing. And that's the key here. Instead of building new out in these peripheries where we do not serve, we were so well established in this industrial area where that's what we're trying to encourage, the site selection process. And we were able to make it happen. And I will always use this as an example of what could occur. Next slide. Next, I'll move on to commercial development on transit corridors. Similar to before with the industrial, but we have our old commercial development. On the top picture, it's a mid-block bus stop, no sidewalk along the corridor. Yes, there's a small little path to the parking lot, and that rider or pedestrian has to cross through a sea of parking to get to their main entrance of their facility, or the store or whatnot where they're trying to get to. In this little picture in the middle, the rendering, it's a typical main transit corridor, which we're trying to achieve here. We have sidewalks on the corridor, buildings creating the street wall, and it allows for efficient routing and the reliability of service. And this newer commercial development at Madison Farms on Freemansburg Avenue in Bethlehem Township shows just that. You have the corridor sidewalk, you have the orientation of the building for a shallow setback, so it's a shorter walk from the bus stop to the main grocery store. And it's just ideal conditions for this pedestrian accessibility. And it's a prime example where we like to see more of, and that allows us not to deviate off the corridor. Next slide. However, if we have to deviate from the primary route to serve a larger commercial center, this older development has a temporary bus stop sign, and that shows that we are an afterthought of when some of these commercial developments were built. The automobile, was the priority, and we're trying to change that. Similar little rendering right underneath that, it shows that if you have the consecutive commercial developments one after another along a main corridor, it's these red and blue arrows. If you can see that, that's the bus circulating in and out and in and out. And there's no internal linkage between these developments, no sidewalk to connect to the corridor. Every deviation adds significant running time to the bus service. Therefore, it makes it less convenient to ride transit, and everyone wants to be the exception to deviate off the main corridor. On the right here, it shows the Tracks of Town Movie Tavern in Lower Macungie, where they incorporated a bus stop within their facility off of Hamilton Boulevard, but we were able to use that road, which is interior linkage, to the Walmart just to the west of it. And where we currently did not serve the Walmart at the site itself. That was more of a convoluted bus stop that we had in the past for the Walmart, but we were able to connect these two adjacent developments right next to each other. That was off the main corridor, and it allows for more efficient routing in that regard too, to avoid going back and forth to the main corridor to serve both properties. We're able to access the driveway that links them together. And this is all through the coordination of the property owners and timing it with that operational board change that I spoke about before. Next slide. So the main goal here is that establishment of the partnerships with the public and private sectors. We need to connect the dots in any existing conditions with proposed projects and how it truly relates to LANTA's routing. If there's a piece of land or new construction or development, if there's an existing LANTA bus stop sign on the property, engage with us. The slide on the left is another favorite example of mine. That's Freemansburg Avenue again. There's our bus stop in red. And just to the right is a small little street with sidewalk and a bus shelter to nowhere. We were not engaged with the CVS that was on that corner when they developed it. It's a nice CVS, it's a nice bus stop shelter. We just don't serve down that road. And if they just, had consulted with us, we could have just reached that sidewalk a little bit more, put that shelter in a different location that actually serves on the corridor. And it's just taking that opportunity to include us in the plan. Next slide. So lastly, it's the visuals. I like to show what is happening from a transit and pedestrian perspective and to be that communicator between the public and private sectors. It's a long haul. It's a piecemeal process of all of these land use issues that are happening, and every municipality is different in the Lehigh Valley, but we are really trying to tie it together. I love my role here based on that, and I cannot wait to see what these long-term improvements come to fruition in the future. You're up, AJ.
All right. Well, thank you, Molly. Thank you for your excellent work on land use policy and for presenting it so clearly with us today. I'm going to move on to another project we're working on that has major land use implications for the region, and that's enhanced bus service. So enhanced bus service is LANTA's longstanding name for bus rapid transit, or BRT. And for those unfamiliar, BRT is a mode of transit that provides fast, frequent, and comfortable transit service along a dedicated transit line or corridor. BRT provides most of the features of light rail without the expensive cost of rail. And the two BRT lines shown below would be new rapid transit for the Lehigh Valley. You can see on the right, there are many elements that are included in a BRT line, including enhanced stations with features like security cameras, lighting, informational signage, off-board fare collection, real-time transit information, frequent service, modern branding and marketing, and all sorts of other stuff. This slide shows the progression of transit service between a region with frequent rail service, as shown on the right, where we are now with most bus routes offering hourly service on the left. As with any market, slow and steady growth is the keys to success. And to get to the right, where we want with frequent rail service, we have to build up the service by adding frequency to our hourly routes, making them every half hour, and then every quarter hour, and then adding the occasional express bus, and so on, so that we can build the market and grow as a successful system. We're on this pathway at the left and growing the system steadily by maintaining a state of good repair. However, the region is growing faster than the system, and as a result, we're actually slightly moving toward the left in this progression. Our goal with the EBS project is to get the system to the column in red, aligning ourselves with peer regions and setting ourselves up for future growth. Similar to the service goals shown using the buses at the top, there's a progression in bus stops and stations at the bottom, from a simple bus stop with a sign on a pole that we're used to modern improvements like benches and shelters, to station stops with added features, and then all the way on up to full transit stations, similar to what you might see in larger cities. EBS is aiming for moderately sized station stops with helpful features for riders while not requiring the large-scale engineering and land acquisition required for larger stations. This image, or these images, are from the A-Line Bus Rapid Transit project in the Minneapolis-St. Paul region, which is a project of very similar scale to what we're looking to build. The most common element in these types of systems is the informational pylon. These help identify a station stop from a distance and usually include technical elements like real-time displays and security cameras. Other common elements include informational signs unique to each stop, identifying the route and neighborhood destinations so that we can really be engaged with the community. Off-board ticket vending machines, which allows service speeds to increase, so you can just jump on board a bus without paying the fare, slowing down the buses. Weather-sensitive shelters, benches, waste baskets, other improvements like bike racks and raised platform boarding areas. One important feature that these types of station stops provide is additional lighting at night, which creates a much safer environment for both transit riders as well as the surrounding neighborhood. So this picture is actually from the Minneapolis C line, which is their third BRT route, which opened in the summer of 2019. The Lehigh Valley began this process back in 2012 by identifying rapid transit as a regional need. And in 2014, the Lehigh Valley Enhanced Bus BRT study was completed. Core network corridors and alignments were identified and assessed as shown here. And additional analyses and assessments in the years since have refined the corridors and station stop placements. 2 lines have been identified as productive BRT corridors for development. Here's a map. The green line is a 14.1 mile line serving the core urban areas of Allentown and Bethlehem, as well as connecting to Whitehall Township and the shopping destinations there, and Southside Bethlehem. The blue line is a 26.8 mile line connecting the entire valley east to west from the emerging job centers in Trexlertown, Bryansville, which Molly just went over in our land use development, all the way to downtown Easton, right on the New Jersey border. Both lines share a 6-mile core alignment along Union Boulevard and West Broad Street, connecting to local destinations like Coca-Cola Park, home of the Iron Pigs, Airport Road, and the Lehigh Shopping Center. Since the completion of the EBS study in 2014, the EBS project has been incorporated into numerous coordinated regional plans, putting us in a strong position to move forward on the completion of the project. EBS plays a large role in Future LV, which is our regional plan, Long-Range Transportation Plan, the Eastern RMTC Regional Operations Plan, and various other municipal plans. For example, here, goal 2.3 in the Future LD plan establishes a regional goal to, quote, encourage enhanced transit connections to improve mobility and job access, unquote. And the plan includes renderings of BRT on key corridors and high-frequency bus service in its centers and corridor sections, as shown in the map on the right. Another example of EBS being incorporated into a plan is Allentown Vision 2030, the City of Allentown's comprehensive plan adopted in 2019. The plan includes LANTA bus routes, as well as the EBS corridor shown here in the solid purple line. EBS station stops are marked with dots and buffers, and buffers are shown around each to encourage transit-oriented development policies, similar to what Molly was just discussing. In addition, the plan establishes the concept of mobility hubs at key EBS station stop locations. A mobility hub prioritizes additional enhancements to pedestrian, bicycle, and other multimodal infrastructure to support the station and create a sense of place around it. Conversations have already started between key stakeholders at one of our mobility hubs at 17th and Shoe, shown at the bottom left in the rendering from the Allentown 2030 plan. This EBS station stop is significant because it's at a key intersection with a large regional hospital and has the potential to support ridership from Allentown High School. And it is also located right at the entrance to the Allentown Fairgrounds, host to the Great Allentown Fair and other major events. So this station stop has the potential to support additional transit capacity needs to better connect it to the region. I just want to quickly show this intersection. So this is 17th and Shoe looking southwest. That's the current conditions. And here's an example of how a station stop could look with just situated at the intersection the way we would in a typical EBS stop. This next rendering is how it could look with enhanced plaza space around it, a feature of the mobility hub concept. It's important to note that these are not renderings, and this mobility hub is just conceptual at this point. It's included as a demonstration of our efforts at LANTA to work with partners in the area to maximize potential for all our transit assets. Similar partnerships at other station stops along the EBS corridors will help maximize return on investment and lower the direct capital costs for everyone involved. So what we gain from EBS, all sorts of things. Lower cost of funding partners. So when productivity is increased on our corridors, the operational cost per rider decreases, saving everyone involved. Increased economic activities in the areas surrounding the station, as well as nearby neighborhoods. Fast and frequent service along these corridors will allow LANTA to better tie in neighborhood circulator service and other local transit routes, which will increase access across the region, not just along the corridors. Safety features, as mentioned, cameras at station stops, also cameras on board buses running frequently along the corridors provide an element of safety across the entire corridor. And also enhanced or signal enhancements such as traffic signal priority and queue jumps will help enhance safety at intersections across the entire corridor, across the entire system. Also more robust tourism, tourist visitors and casual riders all appreciate the enhanced safety measures and rider information at the stops. Some of these choice riders, as people like to call them, will feel more comfortable using the system while visiting the city or attending events. Also increased property values. Capital investments always have a positive return on investment on surrounding properties or any properties within easy walking distance, as evidenced by every BRT project built to date. And then also high frequency bus service on our corridor, not just on these two lines, but also the feeder service that tie into the system. As I mentioned before, a lot of our routes have hourly service. This improvement will allow us to increase the frequency on those routes as well. And now we'll switch gears again to talk a little about service planning work that we're doing to bolster ridership across the region and work to implement enhanced bus service in the region. So we're currently at the tail end of a comprehensive operational analysis process targeting service in Northampton County surrounding the eastern area of our region. A comprehensive operational analysis is a fresh look at service delivery across a service area. A target area is selected for full service or for a full review of services. And in a COA, we don't look at each line individually to see how we can improve it. Instead, we look at the entire service area to see how things can and should be connected to each other. So essentially, the map is wiped clean, all data is collected, assessed, and analyzed, and then maps and schedules are redrawn based on needs. This helps us to balance any areas that may no longer be as productive with new areas of growth. We chose to do a thorough look at services in Northampton County because there have been a number of changes in the area, especially along the Pennsylvania Route 33 corridor. Some of these changes include new medical facilities like the St. Luke's Anderson campus or a new Lehigh Valley Health Network Hecktown Oaks campus currently under construction, new major employment centers, changing needs in the Slate Belt, which is the northern area, northern extent of our service area, and other new developments in the planning phases. We decided to tackle this COA in-house as part of our annual service plan process. And this is a process that never stops. We're constantly monitoring data. However, it does go on an annual cycle. And we officially kick off the annual service planning process each fall with the annual survey. This is a month-long survey process where we attempt to reach out to as many riders as possible through surveys posted online, on social media, on buses, at transit centers, everywhere. We compile all of this data together to form an accurate picture of the system needs. In addition to the survey responses and data analyses, we also make sure to incorporate any development plans, such as those Molly was just talking about, stakeholder needs, social media comments, any complaints or commendations, or any other sources of input we've received over the previous year. And then the next step is to create a plan based on all this information. We do this in the form of an annual report. The annual report is compiled throughout the months of December and January and includes all information mentioned above, as well as a series of recommendations. This report, typically around 200 pages, contains a series of service delivery opportunities in which dozens of options are considered, assessed, and analyzed, and were eventually whittled down to a final option presented to the public. The service change recommendations are presented in a series of public meetings. This past year, they were online public meetings posted online so that anybody can watch them and provide comment at their own pace. And additional comments and concerns are collected and incorporated into the plans. These meetings were held in February and March of this year and generally happen in late spring and early summer. I just want to take a minute to address the benefits of the annual service plan model process. We want to make sure transit riders are aware of any major service changes we are planning well in advance. As Anne-Marie mentioned up front, I've been a bus rider my whole life as well, and I know how we all plan our lives around these services, often choosing where to live, where to work, where to shop, everything based on bus routes. LANTA has 3 service change periods each year, as Molly mentioned, in June, September, and January. In the past, we've often made routing and alignment changes during all 3 of these service change windows, and these changes are often made with only a month's notice. This can be incredibly disruptive to people's lives. So we wanted to put this process in place to prioritize major service changes in June when it's warm and sunny out, just like today, with the hope that we can keep service changes in September and January minimal. It's important to note that we may still make minor schedule changes at these periods if there are service-related issues, but we should no longer have service changes last minute the way we had in the past. Additionally, we all know that sometimes the amount of information we share and surveys we take and announcements on board buses and all of this information can get a little overwhelming. So while we're always open for questions, comments, recommendations throughout the year, this process outlines 2 clear periods of communication with riders each year, the annual survey in fall and the annual service plan meetings in late winter and early spring. That gives riders more buy-in and feel more incorporated in the process, as well as cuts down on all the noise of constant service updates. So what are we talking about when we talk about bus service redesign? Back to the COA process. I just wanted to mention some of the items that we have to balance when looking at service changes across the region. We have to look at headway frequency, which is the amount of time between bus arrivals, service span, which is the number of hours between the first bus departure and the last bus arrival on a line, service coverage, which is the length of a line or the area the network of line covers. So it's just the extent of our service. And if you improve any one of these, it comes at the expense of another. So if we want more frequent buses, we either need to shorten the span of service by removing early morning or late night service, or we need to shorten the length of a line, removing service from an area entirely. It's a difficult balance that requires careful assessment of all data inputs. Some of the data we use are population density, or the number of people living in an area, job density, the number of jobs in an area, boardings and lightings at stops, which is just a count of the people getting on and off buses, and potential ridership calculations. These are calculations based on dozens of inputs, including US Census captured travel patterns, employment statistics, demographics, densities, all sorts of stuff. It's important to note that there are hundreds of reasons people choose to take a bus, and we work to understand and balance all of those reasons. But study after study finds that simple population and job densities, as well as the availability of sidewalks at both ends of the trips, are the primary sources of transit ridership. Sidewalks, just like Molly was talking earlier. People need to feel comfortable on border buses, but also on their journeys to and from buses. That's why we also look at external factors when making these decisions. Things like bus stop amenities, shelters, anything we've worked with area developers, intersections with comfortable waiting environments, all of that stuff. Just want to quickly go over two maps. We did all sorts of maps, but here's a residence map. The circles are boardings and alighting at bus stops, and the shaded colors of blue are residential densities. And you can see the residential densities are pretty well aligned with current bus service. The next map, however, is our employment density in fuchsia, or I guess a reddish purple color. And I'm going to flip back and forth between these. You can see where the areas in the center are building in with all of this new commercial and warehousing development. And this is where we have been discussing the entire time what we're trying to incorporate in our decisions. Additionally, through Molly's land use outreach efforts, we're able to gain a deeper understanding into the project specifics being developed along these new areas. And we're able to incorporate final design considerations into service change plans, often to miraculous feats of coordination. I say miraculous because, for example, the bottom left here is the new LVHN Hecktown Oaks Hospital, which is set to complete construction of the roadways this Friday, 2 days from now. And we are all set to add new bus service on Monday, the 21st, so 5 days from now. We're able to do this by maintaining constant communication with project developers. Molly does a fantastic job of that. And that is reflected all over the region. The map to the right of that is the Schrin Commerce Center development, which had a similar turnover. We were able to incorporate service as soon as a business wanted to open, instead of months after they've already done their hiring process. We also incorporated other capital and planning efforts, such as our EBS, and on the top left is the Allentown Transportation Center, which is currently undergoing reconstruction and set to reopen in September. And so with all of that, putting everything together, we developed a plan that completely changed the alignments of every route in the Easton area, as well as 3 new route services. This is a major service change, and it will affect a lot of people. It starts on Monday. But this major service change will position our services to grow with demand in the future, accessing all of these new employment centers and creating schedules that are adaptable with increased funding opportunities. We don't have time to go into detail on all the changes, but I want to point out 2 new additions. The first is LANTA Flex service to Bath and Hanoverville. Bath is a borough in the northern part of our service area that consistently requests service, but tight road conditions in the borough center make the operation of a 40-foot bus difficult. A similar situation exists just south of it in the Hanoverville Road area, where a weight-restricted bridge prevents us from accessing a number of large and important warehouses. LANTA Flex is a call-ahead, door-to-door service, similar to what you might imagine with, Uber Pool or one of those, where you can make a reservation and go directly from one address to another anywhere in the service zone. This is operated with smaller vehicles that can handle the tight turns and weight-restricted bridges, and service is provided for the same price as our typical bus service. So if you have a monthly pass, you can ride both the Flex or the LANTA bus service. We've been able to add a number of these flex zones to the region, providing increased access to regularly requested but difficult to serve areas. Another exciting addition to the system is a new Route 101 Cross Valley connection. I'm not sure if you can see it here, but it's the thin blue line across the center of this map. It connects Trexlertown in the far western part of our service area with Easton right at the New Jersey line. And if it looks familiar at all, it is the blue line from our EBS map. We're framing out the service from our highest ridership routes to give a taste of the connectivity opportunities we'll see with full build-out of the EBS project. We don't have the service frequency or the demand at specific stops right now to provide limited stop service the way EBS will, across the entire extent. However, we are planning to speed up service slightly in the core of our service area, offering limited stop service between downtown Allentown and downtown Bethlehem, where underlying local service is already provided. We're adding 11 enhanced bus stops that will be named, given unique signage, and will be announced on board buses to elevate the service to a similar quality you might find in a light rail or subway system. And that's that. So here's a quick look again at our service area in September 21 when we incorporate all these new changes. And I know that's all I have today. So we can move on to any questions that have come in. And thank you for sticking with us through all of that.
Great, thanks.
Pass it back. Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much, AJ and Molly. That was great. A lot of great information. So now, if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and AJ and Molly will do their best to answer them. Looks like we have some now. I'll read them, and then you guys can jump in. So it says, AJ Molly. Oh, thank you, AJ Molly. Is the long-term goal for those two identified EBS corridors to become bus-only BRT corridors, like Pittsburgh East Busway?
Oh, that's a good question. The goal is not. So for those unfamiliar, Pittsburgh has busways that are dedicated bus-only lanes throughout the region. Some BRT systems do have dedicated right-of-way the whole way. We don't have the roadway capacity for dedicated right-of-way. That would require taking up a lot of buildings, redesigning all the intersections. So instead, the EBS corridor is using some dedicated segments, but mostly traffic signal priority and signal queue jumps, which at the intersection level allow the bus to pull up around traffic or get a signal priority the way an emergency vehicle might at a light. And that'll speed up service to the region. Eventually, I would love to see a more dedicated, higher capacity facility across the region, but we don't currently have the population to support that level of infrastructure. Thank you.
Great. We have a couple more here. Can you discuss more of the maintenance agreements for LANTA's bus shelters? Will LANTA be responsible for them or local municipalities or the private property owners?
Holly, I think you're muted.
Ali, you're muted.
I'm sorry, everybody. Thank you, Matthew, for the question. I was joking how you can join my next shelter presentation next time I do that, because that will be another hour. But for your question right now, the maintenance agreements for LANTA, if it's in the public right-of-way and it's a LANTA shelter, we do have agreements with each municipality, especially where we have many shelters in that hosting municipality, as an understanding that we would do the snow removal, and our contractor for our advertising would cover the maintenance costs for trash pickup and whatnot. If it's on private property, which is what I've been really trying to achieve the last couple of years with these large warehouse developments, and also just some of the examples today, if that could be incorporated into the land development plan, the concrete slab for a shelter, and that private property owner can purchase, install, and maintain their own shelter. This is, between that Trexler Movie Town or the hospitals or Amazon. It is such a quicker process if that private property owner can do that, and will match their vision for their private complex. If it was LANTA-owned shelter on a private property, that's trickier because it's our maintenance versus their maintenance. And if we need advertising, they may not want advertising on their private property. So we really do try to encourage that private investment and save our LANTA funded shelters, which aren't many because of just our budgeting reasons. We really want to save it for the urban core public right of way, where everybody is really trying to, help with the streetscape improvements. I hope that answers your question. And if not, you can always reach out to me and I can talk a lot more about shelters.
Great, Molly. So Harley Cooper asked, well, actually, he said this presentation was fantastic. So great job, guys, right? Thank you for sharing. Question about serving warehousing. How do you accommodate late night shift changes? Is span of service an issue at all? It's a really good question there.
Yes, span of service is an issue. We do, with these warehousing developments, we are no longer seeing typical 9 to 5 jobs at all. And we do, at this point, our service is almost 24 hours. We're operating 22 and a half-ish hours each day. And unfortunately, we don't have the operating dollars to serve all of that. One of our biggest issues is fleet constraints. So as Molly mentioned, we have 83 buses. We can only put so much service on the street at a time. But in the late hours, we are able to accommodate that service with our fleet with operating dollar assistance. That's our other constraint, is we only have so many dollars to fund service during the day. So often we'll have employers reach out to us in those off-peak hours and provide us with their shift times. And if we're able to accommodate a bus into our service, we go into a revenue support situation where the warehouse or a job center that's trying to have service at their shift times can pay for service at those shift times. And then any ridership they receive along that corridor, not just from their employees, but any employees, anybody that rides the bus on that corridor, comes back in the form of reimbursement. So that's a way to get service out on the street that wouldn't normally go into our service planning because it's targeted to a specific business. But if enough riders ride it, then the agreement goes away. We've got a couple of providers in the area where we're seeing enough ridership that we're looking at ending those contracts, and that's how we handle those late night shifts. The reason we do that is because often employers can change shifts last minute, and if we don't know about it, we're running an empty bus. So it's really important that we maintain those relationships with all of those businesses.
Great. A few more here if you guys have some time.
Sure.
So Adam says hello to Molly, and that he loves how LANTA partners with industrial developers to ensure pedestrian access. And he is curious if you guys also encourage and coordinate transit passes via employee subsidy. Interesting question.
I missed that, Emery. How we incorporate transit passes where?
Via employer subsidy.
Yeah.
Do you encourage that basically?
Yes. So there are issues with employee passes. We do have that for some employers, but particularly for universities, university passes. The issue with dedicated passes is they all need to have unique IDs. So usually if the employer or the school has dedicated passes, they can give us that information and we can incorporate them into our fare collection system. We don't typically create unique passes and then try and sell them out to businesses, particularly because there's just technical issues with that that end up costing far more than the cost of a pass. But anything that we can do in order to make this situation easier is helpful. So if the business approaches us with that idea, we absolutely support that.
Okay, and then Adam goes on to ask you, AJ, he says, BRT can get expensive. How do you plan to compete or secure funding for it? Would implementation be depending on it or phased in based on realized demand?
Yeah, that's kind of a multi-pronged thing. So there's the capital dollars and the operating dollars, and we've identified some pathways toward the capital costs. There's federal programs, new starts, small starts, that we feel very strongly we're able to compete with, especially with our coordination with regional stakeholders and getting in all the service plans. Excuse me. So the capital dollars, we're pretty confident are there. It's in order to get those, we need to secure operating dollars. And that's where we're having conversations with regional stakeholders to see what we can do about increasing our annual subsidy for service so that once we build the capital, once we buy the buses, build the shelters, we're able to continue to provide service into the future. And that is an area where we're in ongoing discussions. In the interim, before that full build out of an EBS system, we are taking steps to improve service on these corridors. As mentioned, right now we've got the Cross Valley connector on the blue line starting this fall. We're hoping to frame out the green line next summer. We're introducing the enhanced stops now, which should add some amenities such as new shelters. Molly's working hard to get new shelters at all of those stops, and service schedules at those. So we're taking a slow, what we call transit first approach to these corridors in order to bolster ridership while we secure funding for the increased frequency and capital that we need for the future build out.
Great. So Patricia asked, where do funds come from for new EBS stations? What about funds for stops and shelters that are not provided by private companies?
Yeah, so as I just mentioned, with the project, with an EBS full-scale project like that, there are plenty of federal grant programs, and as a designated recipient of federal funds, we're eligible for those. It is competitive with other regions, and that's why it's important to, maintain an understanding of where the Lehigh Valley fits into the spectrum and why we're not talking about a larger light rail system, because then suddenly we're competing with Los Angeles instead of competing with El Paso for those funds, just to throw cities out there. That's where the funds for the EBS shelters come from. Additional shelters across the system, those are smaller grants that we get every year, and we don't have funding for many. I don't know, Molly, if you'd like to go into more detail on that, but right now we're in kind of a blessing area where we're building more than we typically are able to.
Yeah, we hope more of those blessings come in future years, but it doesn't happen often. I would say it probably takes I don't know, like a couple years. I hate to say that, but it's really because we can't just do one at a time. We need to have a comprehensive plan of, let's say, 10 to 20 shelters where we're going to place them, and it's based on need of what we prioritize for ridership. And a lot of the ridership, the higher the ridership, the more that we know should be. We don't want to put a shelter in a bus stop location that only gets a couple of riders a day. The problem with that is those high ridership stops happen to be in the urban core where it's tighter spaces in the right of way. And that's a whole nother, this is why it's difficult to place shelters, because we know the need is there, and where do we put them without the capital funds to, let's say, extend the curb into these bulb outs that look like the EBS stations that we're trying to achieve. So if we're starting small, we need to look at the places where we can at least fit them. And then if it's an EBS stop, that we can expand in the long term. But in general, we really do rank them in ridership, and then also based on just where all the demand is coming from. We get a lot of calls in for particular areas, and we just evaluate, and we really just have to put in our top 20 wish list locations, and it may not always I'm sure we disappoint a lot of places out there that want them. And I'm frustrated as well because I would love to put them everywhere and we can't. So it's always a work in progress, and I'll start to prepare my next shelter presentation.
Well, just
Another thing I
go
wanted to
ahead.
throw in there quickly, sorry, Anne-Marie, is the typical shelter costs on average about $14,000 to install. So it is a little bit of an expense. And one of the reasons we really appreciate when the private developers reach out to us and are able to offer it is because when they build that entire spec plan, they're able to procure shelters at a significantly smaller cost than we are able to install them. So by having the private developers build the shelters, it just generally costs less as part of the process.
It's also quick. It's also quicker for them. They really just have to purchase it, install it. It's their property, it's their land. And for us, it's such a third party person in that equation. We have to go through more hoops to get to what we want to achieve.
Okay, before we let go here, there was one more question that kind of piggybacks on what you guys are talking about. It was just about your micro shelters and where do you decide to place those?
I'm not sure. I believe they're referring to soul stops, which is a new thing we've added to our service area last year. Currently, we only have one in the system. We have another one procured that we're looking to install. and Molly is working on installing them in 20 locations across the region right now.
More along our EBS. Yeah, if it's locations and along our EBS where we can't fit a shelter, but we can fit a soul stop, which is basically an all-in-one stop, glorified pole. It's a pole with a stop sign, a stop sign with a little bench. It looks like a upside down, like lowercase t. And we just had one that was the first of its kind of a touchless in our COVID world activation button, because it's a solar light, and we can provide more information on that. But that's all through Brasco International, to give them a plug. They've been wonderful.